Doctors, the people we trust with our lives, the people we let cut us open, pump us full of drugs, and tell us what is wrong with us while we nod along pretending we understand what they are saying. Yeah, sure, doc, sounds good. But what happens when the person holding the scalpel is the most dangerous person in the room? Today we are counting down the top 5 most terrifying doctors to have ever existed, and I promise by the end of this list you will never look at a white coat the same way again. Let's get into it. Number 5. Harold Shipman. Now, let's ease into this list with a man who managed to convince an entire community that he was the most caring, dedicated GP they had ever seen. Harold Shipman was a British family doctor practicing in Hyde, Greater Manchester, and for years his patients absolutely adored him. He was attentive, he made house calls, he remembered birthdays, he was basically the golden retriever of general practitioners. So you can imagine the shock when in 1998, a local funeral director noticed something a little off. Specifically that a suspiciously high number of Shipman's elderly female patients were dying. And not just dying right after a visit from their beloved doctor. A formal inquiry was launched, and what investigators uncovered sent shockwaves across the entire country. Shipman had been injecting his patients with lethal doses of diamorphine, otherwise known as medical-grade heroin, and then falsifying their medical records to cover his tracks. At his trial in 2000, he was convicted of 15 murders, but a subsequent public inquiry concluded that the actual number was likely around 250 victims, making him the most prolific serial killer in recorded British history. He never confessed. He never explained himself. He just sat there through the entire trial with this completely unbothered look on his face, like a man waiting for a bus. In 2004, Shipman was found hanging in his cell at Wakefield Prison. He took his motive to the grave, and honestly, at this point, I think that might be the most terrifying part of the whole story.
Number 4, Walter Freeman. Okay, so picture this. It is the 1940s. Mental health treatment is basically a guessing game, and a man named Walter Freeman has just decided that he has the solution to all of it. Freeman was an American neurologist who became obsessed with the lobotomy, a surgical procedure that involved severing connections in the brain's prefrontal cortex. Now, the original version of this surgery at least required an operating room, a trained surgeon, anesthesia, the basics. But Walter Freeman looked at all of that and thought, you know what? Too complicated. Let me fix that. And so he invented what he cheerfully called the transorbital lobotomy. He would take a device that looked almost exactly like an ice pick, insert it through the patient's eye socket, and use a hammer to tap it through the thin bone into the brain. He would then wiggle it around to sever the nerve fibers, and that was it. Procedure done, patient fixed. In his mind, anyway. Now, here is where it gets truly wild. Freeman was not even a surgeon. He had no surgical training whatsoever. He would perform these procedures in his office, in hospital wards, and at one point even in a van that he drove around the country, which he called the lobotomobile, which is a sentence I genuinely never thought I would say. He performed over 3,500 lobotomies in his lifetime. Many patients were left permanently disabled, unable to speak, unable to care for themselves. Some died on the table. One of his most famous patients was Rosemary Kennedy, the sister of President John F. Kennedy, who was left severely incapacitated after her procedure at age 23. Freeman's hospital privileges were eventually revoked in 1967 after a patient died during their 3rd lobotomy. He went back for a 3rd try before the hospital finally said, okay, enough.
Number 3. Shiro Ishii. Now we are moving firmly out of unsettling and straight into deeply disturbing territory. Shiro Ishii was a Japanese Army medical officer and microbiologist who during World War II served as the director of a covert biological warfare research unit known as Unit 731, operating in Japanese-occupied China. Ishii oversaw experiments on prisoners of war and civilians that were so extreme and so far outside any conceivable ethical boundary that they defy belief. Prisoners were exposed to plague, cholera, typhoid. Frostbite was deliberately induced. Surgeries were performed without anesthesia. And through all of it, Ishii collected data. That was the point, always the data. After Japan's surrender in 1945, here is where it gets even more enraging. American authorities struck a secret deal with Ishii, granting him and his unit immunity from war crimes prosecution in exchange for the research data. He never faced trial. He never faced justice. He lived freely in Japan until his death from throat cancer in 1959. Meanwhile, the survivors spent the rest of their lives waiting for an apology that never came. She remains one of the clearest examples in history of what happens when medicine is stripped of its humanity entirely and replaced with pure, cold ambition.
Number 2, John Harvey Kellogg. All right, I need you to take a deep breath for this one because things are about to get very strange very fast. You know Kellogg's, the cereal brand, cornflakes, the little rooster on the box. Wholesome, right? Let me introduce you to the man behind the brand, and I promise you wholesome is the last word you will use to describe him. John Harvey Kellogg was an American physician who ran the Battle Creek Sanitarium in Michigan in the late 1800s, and his beliefs about the human body were, let's call them, unconventional. Kellogg was absolutely convinced that most of humanity's physical and moral problems were caused by one thing. And if you are thinking that is a bold claim for one thing to carry, you are correct. Kellogg developed cornflakes specifically as a bland food designed to suppress what he considered sinful urges. He genuinely believed that diet could switch off human desire and that this was a medical priority. He advocated for and personally performed a range of procedures so invasive and so bizarre that I cannot go into full detail here. He published all of his beliefs proudly in books with his name on the cover, multiple books. To top it all off, Kellogg never consummated his marriage. He and his wife adopted all of their children. He slept in a separate bedroom for the entirety of their 40-year marriage and genuinely believed this made him a superior human being. The cereal is fine, though. The cereal is completely fine. Number 1, H.H. Holmes. And here we are, number 1. The entry that earns this video its title. Herman Webster Mudgett, better known by his alias H.H. Holmes, was America's first widely documented serial killer. And the fact that he was also a doctor should tell you everything you need to know about the audacity of this man. Holmes was charming, well-educated, and completely without conscience. He obtained his medical degree from the University of Michigan in 1884 and then relocated to Chicago, where he built what newspapers would later call the Murder Castle. Now, that name alone should have been a red flag for literally everyone involved, but it was the 1890s. So let's press on. The building Holmes constructed for the 1893 World's Fair was a 3-story hotel that he designed himself, deliberately hiring and firing different construction crews so that no single person understood the full layout. And what a layout it was. Over 100 rooms, hidden staircases, secret passages, airtight rooms that could be flooded with gas, a chute leading directly to the basement, and in the basement, a dissection table, a surgical table, a kiln large enough to incinerate a human body, and vats of acid. He would lure guests, employees, and women he had charmed into his hotel. He took out life insurance policies on many of them, and then they disappeared. He later confessed to 27 murders, though historians believe the actual number was significantly higher. But here is the detail I cannot get out of my head. Holmes sold skeletons. He would strip the flesh from his victims and sell the articulated skeletons to medical schools. As a doctor, he knew exactly which institutions were buying. He had all the right contacts. He operated in plain sight for years. He was finally caught in 1894 on an unrelated horse fraud charge, of all things, and his hotel was only uncovered by accident when investigators followed the money. He was hanged in 1896 and reportedly requested that his coffin be filled with cement and buried 10 feet underground because he was afraid someone would do to his body what he had done to so many others. And with that image burned permanently into your brain, that is our list. Stay safe out there and maybe reschedule that doctor's appointment.